this is a beginning point. It's the beginning of the rest of my life. I got the meaning, and I got to write it down, because I don't want to forget it.
Just win, baby.
Welcome back to the Gold Jacket Podcast with me, one of your hosts, Gymnastic. And as always, because I'm sometimes not here, like last week, our other host, Connor Donald, man. Connor, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jim, man. We missed you last week, man. Ellis tried to rock the beard. He made reference to you a number of times. Don't worry, it was as if you were here, but you weren't here. So we just didn't get your takes on the situation there, but we tried to do you well last week. But we get the takes this week. We get the opinions and we get the old gymnastic sense of humor back this week. And we are a proud member of the True North Fantasy Football Network, and you can find them on Twitter at True North FFB, on YouTube, TNFF Network, and on the internet at TrueNorthFFB.com. There's a ton of stuff going on this offseason, new website launching. Plus, we just launched an Instagram page, which I think is True North FFB as well. If you want to hit to follow that, I'm going to have to add that to the growing list of the network that we have. And this week we have a fellow True North Fantasy Football content creator. He has his own YouTube channel called Coach Craig Sports, where he talks everything NFL and NBA. He also asked to come on because he's a resident woeful Houston Texans fan. So he had to come talk AFC South with us. That is Craig at Coach Craig Sport on Twitter. What's up, Craig?
I'm doing pretty good. And yeah, definitely had to come off for AFC South. I think it's a interesting division, even if Texans are kind of lackluster right now.
Yeah, definitely. It is a division that is definitely in flux, whether you want to talk about Carson Wentz, whether you want to talk about Deshaun Watson, whether you want to talk about Trevor Lawrence. That's just a quarterback room. We haven't even started to dive into, Tebow mania, among many other things. So let's get into it because I know there is so much to talk about. We're going to start with the quarterbacks, and we're going to lead off with the Texans in each category as much as it's going to pain us. We didn't bring Craig on for no reason, so we'll let them be first place for this show and this show only. So we'll start with the quarterback situation. The Texans, let's assume Deshaun Watson's not playing another snap with the Texans because I think it's pretty clear that is where this is going, whether he settles his case or not. He reported to camp. The trade request stays. So does Tyrod Taylor intrigue you guys at all in fantasy? And if not, does anybody else intrigue you? Say maybe Davis Mills? Or are we just straight up avoiding the Houston Texans as quarterback for fantasy? We'll start with you, Craig.
Yeah, I think Tyrod's just pretty much a QB3 in super flex right now. Somebody that you can plug and play. He's not going to win you a week. He's not going to lose you a week. When he comes in, I have no interest at all in Davis Mills. He had the least career starts of any quarterback in this year's draft class at 11. The only thing he has to his name is he was the number one quarterback coming out of high school ahead of Tua. That's it. If you watch him play at Stanford, really slow processor, not that great arm strength. There's just a lot of flaws to his game. Kind of reminds me of A.J. McCarron coming out of college, but doesn't really have that much experience. And we just cut A.J. McCarron, so why take another version of him in the third round? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And if your team's going to be as bad as it's going to be, you're probably going to end up with one of the top 3 picks where you're just going to take a quarterback anyways, whether it's Spencer Rattler, Sam Howell, or somebody else that breaks onto the scene this year. So it seems like a wasted pick. I think he's actually going to start the year probably on the depth chart as the third-string quarterback behind even Jeff Driscoll is what I would expect, since Driscoll at least has that NFL experience as well.
I feel like the Trubisky career arc is being extremely generous because I don't think he gets 3 years of starting experience. So he'd be lucky to get 3 games. But what about you, Jim, for the Texans quarterbacks?
Listen, I'm intrigued a little bit about Tyrod. I got him on a few Superflex teams, as my QB4, QB5. With this news right now, though, I am trying to still flip him. I was trying to earlier in the offseason, but with him actually coming back, maybe looking like he might play, but not for the Texans, hype's getting back up with him. So, like, again, if I can get a second, I'm smashing. If I can even maybe get like a third for him in Superflex, I'd probably take it, because the odds of him actually playing this year, slim to none. And if he does, are you really going to be relying on him to plug him in your lineup? No, probably not. So no, I'm not really interested in acquiring him, but I'm definitely interested right now with the hype to try to dump him for maybe, like I said, a third I would take, a second I would smash.
Yeah, no, I kind of like it. I mean, you never know what you might be able to get, especially in super flex leagues, especially if, if at all even gets to start at all before, maybe a punctured lung or something. You just never know. But I think that's all we really need to say about the Houston Texans quarterback room. We'll move on to the Indianapolis Colts, a little slightly more intriguing. So Phillip Rivers is out, and the Colts have acquired Carson Wentz from the Philadelphia Eagles, reunite him with his former offensive coordinator, Frank Reich. Wentz had a major down year last season. Do you think that he may bounce back this season behind the offensive line that's in Indy and a reunion with Frank Reich? And, I mean, when you look at it, Wentz does have an unproven wide receiving room outside of T.Y. Hilton, fairly well-established running back room, which is good, and decent tight ends, and we know that he loves his tight ends. We'll start with you, Jim. What is your overall opinion on Carson Wentz in fantasy and dynasty and in his new situation in Indy?
I'm really interested to see what he can do, because he's got a really good offensive line right now. He's got really good run game, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He's got another, like, people keep discounting T.Y. Hilton, but like, he's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. He can give you that option. I like, and I seem to be a lot higher on Michael Pittman than most seem to be. I like him. I think he can be the man. And we'll see what Paris Campbell can do. Again, they're hyping him up. I saw Chris Ballard talking about it, saying Marlon Mack and Paris Campbell are going to be a full go. We'll see, right? Like, I mean, he's only ever played 9 games in 2 years, but like, Carson Wentz has a pretty good wide receiver core on paper here and a top offensive line. So if he can't do it, and again, interesting options with the tight ends, right? You got a big man in Mo Alley Cox in the red zone. You got Kylan Granson, who's really a dynasty darling, sleeper, late end tight end that people are liking, myself included. Just there's a lot of opportunities in the wide receiver room, tight end room for him. And the guy that's going to be throwing the ball is Carson Wentz. So he's really cheap right now. So I'd be grabbing him. People still have that stink on him from Philly. Sorry, sorry, buddy. But he still got that Philly stink on him that people don't want. But behind a top offensive line where he isn't chucking the ball every 2 seconds for his life, where people are coming at him, I'm interested to see what he could do, because he was a top prospect coming out. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in buying.
I love Wentz. I'm a Wentz truther. I think we let him go far too soon, and the situation just got ugly in Philadelphia, and that happens. I like how you completely just threw Jack Doyle aside like he isn't even in the tight end room, a guy who I think was the tight end 1 on the team 6 weeks last season. But don't worry, Granson came in. He's a darling. We good. What about you, Craig? What do you think about Carson Wentz?
I think it's really interesting. And, we've seen the good with the Carson Wentz. We've seen the bad. The best we've seen him has pretty much been with Frank Reich, too. So I think if he's going to do it anywhere, it's got to be here. And if it's not here, like, he's this close to being a career backup if he can't do it here. I would say the one thing that's a little bit concerning, too, is, they did bring in Eric Fisher to play left tackle, but he's coming off that Achilles. So is he going to be ready to play week 1? And if he's not, is that going to be a big hole on the offensive line? And, being that blind side for Carson Wentz, that could be a big deal for him. I think a lot of the problem, too, that you kind of have to look at is Carson Wentz was really trying to hold on to the ball and kind of trying to chuck it deep too often last year, too. See if there's a little bit more balance to his game. And just kind of see how that all works out, really, because if you can get him back to where he's not looking to throw deep and push the ball down the field all the time and kind of force things, you really saw that last year a lot. Is he was just trying to make too many throws, like he's trying to make a Patrick Mahomes play on like every play, like he's on the right side of the field trying to throw back across the body to the left side of the field. Like, you can't just do that 10 times a game. It's not going to work out too well for you, especially when you're Carson Wentz and you're not like a Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes can't even do that 10 times a game even. So there's just a lot of concerns there. I think that they're going to try to simplify it. I think maybe he feels a little bit more comfortable in the Frank Reich's offense too, because we did hear some rumors, coming out last year about the year prior that he was changing some plays at the line of scrimmage because he wasn't agreeing with what Doug Peterson was calling in too. So maybe there's a little bit more trust there than there was last year as well.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully so, because Carson Wentz can be head for, like, I think last I saw his ADP's right around QB 20. So he can be head for a bargain. He's down there with Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield. And I think he has far better upside so far, proven upside than Derek Carr or Baker Mayfield for fantasy purposes. Moving onward to another really intriguing situation, and this is Jacksonville, where apparently we have to start referencing, people talking about shit as a reference to how hard they're working to get to not give up their number one job. Of course, Gardner Minshew. Will it be Trevor Lawrence? Will it be Gardner Minshew? Minshew isn't giving up his starting job. Meyer won't announce that the 101 in the 2021 draft will be the starter. But seriously, long-term thoughts on Trevor Lawrence for Dynasty Fantasy. I know that there was originally some concerns with Urban Meyer. Do those concerns continue to stick? And concerns with Jacksonville in general. This is a team who was so close to sniffing like the Super Bowl and completely had to blow it up within the year after. So do you trust Jacksonville to continue to build around Trevor Lawrence and to get this thing right? Or what are your thoughts? We'll start with you, Craig. You can start with Minshew if you think he'll be the starter, or you can just talk Trevor Lawrence.
I will say I think the NFL is a more fun place when Gardner Minshew is a starting quarterback in the NFL, just because of all the charisma around him. He's just a special guy, but he kind of lost his power when he cut his hair, so there is that. But all seriousness aside, Trevor Lawrence is going to be the starting quarterback there. Week one, it's pretty much a guarantee at this point. I think you bring up some interesting points with Jacksonville too, just because they had a real culture problem down there. It's not really a secret. At one point in time, the complaints for NFL teams to the league's commissioner, to the league office, about half the teams were complaints against Jacksonville. So that kind of says a little bit of something there. I think they're trying to bring in some guys to change the culture, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, Urban Meyer, some of these other coaches that they brought in as well. So I think it's definitely a good thing. I still have some questions, just about Trevor Lawrence's upside overall, how this offense is going to look under Urban Meyer, Darrell Bevell there. So long-term aspect, I think he'll be all right. I don't know if he's going to be, your top, 5 quarterback ever, especially like in Dynasty. I think he's a little bit overvalued in redraft this year, though. So he's going a little bit higher than I'd like to take him, because I think there's some guys that are going behind him that could finish ahead of him as well. But there's some opportunities, just kind of depend on how their defense all pans out this year, because if he ends up having to throw a bunch, there's definitely some opportunity for fantasy there. But I think their defense is going to be a little bit better than people give them credit for as well.
What about you, Jim? Are you buying into him? I know redraft might be a little high. What about from a strictly dynasty perspective?
Well, I really Craig hit a lot of points there that I fully agree with. I think he's very overvalued in season long. I don't think he's ever going to see the ceiling that you think you're going to get with him while you're drafting him in Dynasty, which makes me not want to get him. And I'm afraid people, we talked about this before, right? The sunken fallacy cost, that. I think that's going to keep his price too high for me for the first couple of years. I really like a couple pieces in this offense that we will get to in the next couple pieces, but I'm not a big fan of Urban Meyer. I really hope I'm wrong about it, because I do like I said, there's 2 pieces in this offense that I'm really invested in, and I really hope to God they're it. And I hope I'm wrong about Urban Meyer, but to me, Trevor Lawrence's price is just a little too high. I think it's always going to be too high, because like Coach Craig said there, man, there's guys going after him that I think will outperform him.
I like it. Definitely a good opinion. Season long avoid, but in Dynasty, if you got him in your rookie drafts, good job. If not, he might come at a little bit of an expensive price tag. Finally, we're going to stop in probably the most consistent destination from a quarterback perspective in the division, and that is the Titans. Ryan Tannehill is back and has a renewed wide receiving group. Davis is out. Julio Jones and Reynolds are in. Tannehill has been the picture of a low-end QB1 consistency since coming to the Titans and getting away from Adam Gase. Does a renewed focus at the wide receiver position help bump his value at all? One interesting fact that I found, Tannehill's receivers had the second most drops in the NFL last season. So imagine what those could have actually turned into for Ryan Tannehill, who I think finished as a QB 8 or 9. He was right at the tail end of the QB1 area. So we'll start with you, Jim. Thoughts on Ryan Tannehill? I guess season long, he's a safe play. What about from a dynasty perspective? He is, 32 years old now?
Which isn't that old. Again,
Mhm.
people are playing way longer. Look at Tom Brady. Again, not saying he's Tom Brady, but what an upgrade for him, though, right? I mean, you get rid of Corey Davis, who is susceptible at best, and you bring in Julio Jones, who people were just kicking under the rug. His price has gone, like Smoke just said right there, to the moon, to the moon. So if you have him, great. This is a perfect opportunity where you can flip him for what is perceived as a lower value cost and pick up a lower end RB, like a Chase Edmonds, say, potentially that could gain value. I'm not really high on Chase Edmonds, but just trying to pick up a guy real quick. I mean, this is the perfect opportunity because people think he's going to go from QB8 to QB6. I don't really see that. You saw a couple injuries to some big name quarterbacks, kind of put some guys up there a little higher. I'm a little higher on two of the most are. So I think he's going to make a little bit of a push. All this being said, you know what I mean? I don't think he's going to get higher than QB8 for you. So his value, I think, is at a peak right now where people think he could be QB top 5 QB, a tail end, probably 5th. But I don't think he's ever going to be there. It's just the allure of Julio, and I like it. Don't get me wrong. I like Julio. It scares me for Derrick Henry a little bit, if anything.
What about you, Craig?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a boost to Ryan Tannehill bringing in Julio, obvious upgrade over Corey Davis. And even like you kind of talked about, Josh Reynolds, he's going to be an upgrade over Adam Humphries because Adam Humphries was pretty much a ghost last year with his concussions. I thought he was just going to retire after last year, but that's a whole different story just because he missed so many weeks with those concussions. So you're playing guys like Khalif Raymond and Cameron Batson, who does have a little bit of role as a gadget player in this offense. But I think definitely some more consistent weapons there. We'll see what kind of impact the loss of Jonnu Smith, especially in the red zone, has overall for the team. Maybe that opens up some more opportunities. I don't think Derrick Henry can score very many more touchdowns, but maybe that opens up the opportunity for Ryan Tannehill to still maintain, his 6 touchdowns that he got last year.
Perfect. Love it. Definitely some good points made there. So now we've come to the point where for dynasty purposes, you pick your gold QB and you pick your fool's gold QB. And this may be kind of tough because there's only one consistent point of all the quarterbacks. But let's start with you, Jim. Give us your gold quarterback that people should be buying and maybe undervaluing. And give us a fool's gold who's probably going to bust his ADP.
So my goal is Carson Wentz. I think he's in the perfect opportunity to be buying right now where he's going to increase his value. And from a dynasty standpoint, that is exactly what you want to be doing. You want to be guying these guys on the low. They're going to have a blow-up season, which I hope to God he does, and increases his value back to, 2017 for him?
2017, the
2017
MVP season.
Yeah, right? Obviously he's not going to reach there, but you want to hit somewhere in between there, right? So he's a guy that I'm buying. He's a gold quarterback for me in investment value. My fool's gold, sorry, Smoke, is Trevor Lawrence just because of the cost it's going to get you to get him. Unless you had the 101 in your rookie draft, I think the cost is just going to be too much to acquire him, and you're going to be biting yourself for it.
What about you, Craig? Fool's gold?
I think the goal for me is going to be just Ryan Tannehill because I think he's the most consistent. You know what you're getting. He's not completely overvalued. He's a little bit more overvalued probably now than he's ever been, especially from a dynasty sense. But in redraft, he's really not overvalued at all. He's just kind of right where he's been. Nobody's really given him that bump up as much in redraft. But I feel like the price is probably fair. If you have to go out and grab him in dynasty, I don't think it's the worst investment in the world. I think what you're going to get for the next couple of years with him at least too, and it's going to be a steady ride. Fool's gold probably looking more like I'm going to kind of agree with Trevor Lawrence too. I just don't see the incredible upside there that he's ever going to be that top 5 quarterback. And I forgot to mention this earlier. I don't think he's going to run as much in the NFL, especially near the goal line as some people like to think. Especially this year, I don't think they're going to run him very much at all, just because he's coming off that left shoulder injury as well. So I don't think they want him to throw his body around as much as he did in college. So quite a different factors there. Maybe my sneaky sleeper pick for Gold could be whoever the Texans draft at quarterback next year.
Definitely. Yeah, that's definitely a good one because he'll probably be the 101 next year in your rookie super flex drafts. Gold for me is Carson Wentz. Same reasons as Jim was pointing out. That is a golden opportunity to blow his value out of the water. Even if he doesn't do that great behind that offensive line, he's got a lot of safety blankets that can at least get him to bordering on a QB1. And my fool's gold, I'm going with you guys. I'm going to go Ryan Tannehill, Trevor Lawrence, because he is really expensive. If you're drafting him outside of the rookie drafts, it's going to cost you. And we have to wonder, is he going to be capable of hitting the ceiling? I know that he's been talked about as a generational talent, but it's a pretty lofty ceiling that's being put out in front of him for sure. So moving onward and upward to the second most important position in a super flex league, and that's running backs. Again, we'll start with the Houston Texans. I quite simply started my my notes off with the gagging face and then just the vomiting face, because that is pretty much what I see in the running back room. But can the Texans lineup of veteran running backs provide any value to owners based on their ADP? David Johnson's currently going RB47, Philip Lindsay RB67. The rest of them are outside of RotoViz's Dynasty ADP, where the cutoff is RB80. Or should they be completely avoided in Dynasty? I know they could provide the upside in season long, obviously, but what are your thoughts there? We'll start with you, Craig.
I think, honestly, Philip Lindsay is pretty much free in all formats right now. Dynasty, redraft, and I don't even remember what I got him in the Scott Fish Bowl. It was like the 14th round or something like that. This is a guy that could be a starting running back. He's a guy that's ran for over 1,000 yards twice in his career, split carries with Melvin Gordon last year. You know, it's not out of the realm of possibility for him to have a major impact. We've seen David Johnson not be the healthiest in recent years, too. I think it's really just going to be him and David Johnson by the end of this. Mark Ingram. He signed a 1-year deal there. I kind of think he's just kind of there to be the assistant running back coach. There's some rumors that he might even get cut. So he has that relationship with David Culley, with them both being with the Ravens for the last couple of years too. So just kind of that veteran presence there. But with the rumors of him being cut now, maybe Rex Burkhead's looking all right off his ACL, but I'm not going to count on him coming back too strong off his ACL either. So I think you could see a decent dose of Philip Lindsay early on and then kind of see David Johnson involved in the passing game too. I think at least for redraft this year, they both could be flex plays. You know, who knows if Philip Lindsay looks good enough this year, they might keep him around for a little while too, so he could have some value in Dynasty as well. And like I said, for what you're paying for him, pretty much free. David Johnson, not as interested in him as in Dynasty, but I think there is some value there. Maybe you hit a couple weeks. He's a guy, if you're drafting him as like your running back 4, running back 5, there's not really any harm there with he could provide in that passing game upside. We've seen LaShawn McCoy have like 50 catches playing with Tyrod Taylor up in Buffalo too, so it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility either.
Love it. Definitely some good points made there. Philip Lindsay definitely looking like a bit of a value, and I think a lot of people forget that he's had 2 1,000-yard seasons, usually split in work. Jim, what are your thoughts for the people listening in podcast form? Jim was all thumbs up to Philip Lindsay.
Yeah, man. I'm a big fan of Philip Lindsay. Like you're saying, people seem to forget that this undrafted free agent out of Colorado rushed for 2 1,000-yard seasons already behind, like, not really the greatest team either to be doing it in Denver. Doesn't have a lot of competition. I don't care what you say. Like David Johnson, I'm not really too worried about. Big Trust I like, but like you said, there's rumors about him possibly being cut and being like the Deuce Staley of the Houston Texans there, and just being like a mentor that's going to end up becoming a coach. Man, he's free. He is free. Like, I don't know, like, if this is like so much stink again of like Deshaun Watson doesn't play, and if it's Tyrod, whatever, Davis Mills, whoever the hell they're going to get. If it's Blake Bortles, I don't know. He's out of Green Bay now. Who knows who they're going to get? Maybe Gardner Minshew, man. Who knows? Like, who fucking knows? But there's definitely options if they want to stay afloat and they don't want to completely tank, which I do think they do want to completely tank and get a top 3 pick and get, like Coach Craig was saying, a Spencer Rattler or a Howell. But like he is free, man. And in PPR, like David Johnson would be the guy I would probably go after more in PPR because like there's a stigma on Phillip Lindsay too, thinking like he's a good pass catcher where he's more of a traditional banger running back when it comes to his running style, but he doesn't look it, which is like deceptive to people. They think he's a good PPR steal, but again, like what is it costing you? Like a 15th rounder? Like who cares if he doesn't? Like these are the perfect opportunities. Even Tyrell McLaughlin says like it gets sorted out by like week 3. Week 2, like he's a guy that you can cut right away, it, and like for your waiver wire, you're not wondering if he's a bench guy. So I see no problems with him.
Definitely no. I definitely agree with that point. And the Texans have a lot of 1-year contracts. They have a lot of kind of prove it deals and see what they get out of it and see if they can get further contracts. So you never know, he could end up landing a slightly bigger 3rd running back contract. But I mean, at worst, like I think that people think just because the Texans are so bad, like they're not going to run, they're not going to pass, no one's going to catch a football. Like, no, this isn't realistic. The floor is the Baltimore Ravens rushing attack and how little they get because of Lamar Jackson. You're not getting that low. And then the ceiling is like, the Titans who run with Derrick Henry like crazy, who gets 300 rushes a season by himself. So like, that a team still is going to run the ball like at least 150, 200 times, no matter the game script, no matter the flow of things. There's going to be a ball handed off to go around, and there's going to be passes to go around for that backfield as well, for sure. Because I can almost guarantee they need some safety blankets there. And when we dig into the tight ends later, I don't think it's going to be at the tight end position. I think it's more at the running back position. Next up, we'll move on to the Colts. Very intriguing backfield here. It looks like the Jonathan Taylor rocket has left Earth, and I think it's passing the moon now. He's going as the RB2 in dynasty startups right now behind Christian McCaffrey. Colts running backs ranked 2nd in average PPR per week, behind only the Saints last season. JT being the team's number 1 running back in the last 5 straight weeks. Although many people aren't mentioning the matchups that he had in those 5 weeks, they choose to ignore that, but talk about it with David Montgomery. But in reality, JT did have 12 weeks as an RB2 and 6 as an RB1. So you're getting a very, very strong running back in Jonathan Taylor. So my question to you guys is Taylor the next big workhorse at running back? And what about Hines? He finished as the RB15 last season. He finished as an RB2 2 times in the last 5 weeks as Taylor started to take over. But he did rank top 5 in a lot of the change of pace categories, be it targets, receptions, receiving yards, etc. We'll start with you, Jim, on your thoughts on the Colts backfield.
So I just want to really quickly say, like I touched on earlier with Chris Ballard and his interview, said who was a full go. He mentioned Marlon Mack was a full go. So as much as I'm a big Jonathan Taylor fan, I love him. I'm actually watching this backfield, not because I think Marlon Mack's a huge threat to Jonathan Taylor in the terms of sheer talent, but what I'm going to do with Cam Akers is just like what I want to just sidetrack on here. I want to see what Marlon Mack does coming back here behind a very good offensive line. And if he can look any good, because if he can look anything good, I'm going to start throwing 2nd rounders at Cam Akers owners, because I think he's way more talented than Marlon Mack. So if Marlon Mack can come back, and this is what I'm going to be watching at, because I'm not 100% sold on him. But Jonathan Taylor, my advice is, I think if you didn't get him last year during the first half of the season when there was that dip and owners were panicking, I think you really missed out. And now you're going to start paying like 2 first-round prices, and there's other running backs that you could possibly get that are better, maybe a little cheaper, like Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones. Like these are just running backs, I think, just because he has the youth on his age, like the youth on his side, these people are thinking like, oh, I'll have a running back for 7 years. Bullshit. You'll be lucky if you have a peak running back for 3. Nothing against him, but you know what I mean? You got to be playing it like that, especially with the running backs. So I think you missed the train, man, if you didn't draft him or take him in the first half of the season when he was dipping before that 5-game immense stretch where he blew up.
What about you, Craig?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting points that both of you already made. I was going to bring up that Jonathan Taylor down the stretch too. You know how we don't talk about it, but we talk about it for David Montgomery too. I think there's definitely some concerns though here. Is he ever going to get, that big, slot the percentage of the snaps? Is he going to get the big target share? Concerns there too. Maybe they limit. The Colts kind of like to rotate their backs anyways, but maybe they tried to limit him a little bit on purpose too, because of all the carries that he did have at Wisconsin for 3 years there. He had over 200 carries, I believe, all 3 years. I believe 2 of the years were over 300 carries too. I could be wrong on that, but just so that you got a lot of workload questions, and that's kind of what even Jim brought up. You're not going to have this running back for a long time, and honestly, the price to acquire Jonathan Taylor, it's so high right now. I'd rather try to go out and grab a guy like DeAndre Swift that adds that more of a pass catching element that I can get for cheaper right now, because people are lower on him because the Lions aren't that good, and they're pretty much the same age, and like I said, you can already get them for cheaper. So I think the Colts backfield is very interesting, especially with Naeem Hines too. Yeah. Is he going to get that 70-plus targets that he got 2 out of the last 3 years, or is he going to get closer to 50 like he did 2 years ago? That's really going to make the bigger difference for him. They saw, he's had those weird weeks where he got 2 touchdowns, where he was getting some carries around the goal line. It's not really his game, but, if Jonathan Taylor is more efficient towards that goal line, could really help him out. And like you said, Marlon Mack, we'll see what he is when he comes back from the Achilles injury. This Colts team also has 2 other players coming off Achilles. We already talked about Eric Fisher, and then Dio Obadingo out of Vanderbilt, the rookie defensive end as well. So we'll see if they have a special program coming back for ACL or for off of Achilles there or what. And I'll mention one little thing just kind of deeper down the depth chart, but I think Jordan Wilkins ends up getting cut, and Deion Jackson is the 4th running back. He's a rookie out of Duke. He was one of the top kind of players that were undrafted free agents. I believe he got $200,000 signing bonus, so which was one of the tops among the undrafted guys. So I think he's going to end up beating out Jordan Wilkins. I think he's a little bit more talented than Jordan Wilkins, and who knows, maybe he plays a little bit of special teams as well.
Interesting. A taxi squad note taken there for anybody listening. And you guys definitely make a good point about Jonathan Taylor's workload. Like when we talk wide receivers, their career in the NFL really starts from day one, unless they had a bad injury history in college. So when you talk 7 years out for them, you talk 7 years out. When you talk 7 years out for running back, you really got to look back to their college workload. And it's really more like 7 years back is 7 years in like the lifespan of a running back is more like 4 NFL years, 3 college years. Like it's very different. So you guys definitely make some good points in that department. Next up, we're going to head on over to Jacksonville, where they've made a bit of a muddy situation, but a fun situation to look at. Is Urban preparing to create the next great NFL backfield tandem with Travis Etienne and James Robinson? James Robinson signed, as we all know, as a UDFA last season, finished as the RB7. He was the big surprise story of last season for fantasy. And then the Jags turned around and invested a first-round pick in Travis Etienne. Etienne faced his college skepticism over his ability to absorb contact and play through contact, which Robinson had absolutely zero issues with last season in Jacksonville, behind a not so great offensive line and behind a terrible offense overall. Etienne is currently being drafted at RB13. Does this worry you to invest that high given the potential dual back system? Well, James Robinson is going RB24. Do you think the Jags may be a team who can produce 2 top 24 running backs? We'll start with you, Craig.
Oh, that's a tough one. I think, looking at those dynasty numbers, they're both a little bit overvalued, I think, because I think James Robinson's a guy when you talk in terms of dynasty, he could be gone and after next year, like just be dust in theory. If Travis Etienne comes in and he plays really well and he just kind of takes this job over, it wouldn't surprise me. They also have Carlos Hyde on that 2-year contract. So they could end up trading James Robinson, and if they just have Hyde and Etienne, I don't think Urban Meyer has a problem with that going into next year, if that's what they want to do. And, they did bring back Dario Gumbawale for whatever reason, too. He's a great special teamer and everything like that. And he can get the ball pretty well in pass blocks, so maybe he's in there on third down and pass blocking situations as well. But Out of these two, Etienne's really the one that I want. He's probably going a little bit more expensive than I would probably pay for him like in a startup draft, but I think in the rookie draft, kind of the area where he was going, that's probably where you have to pick him up. Maybe you can still get him on the cheap, especially if he gets off to a slow start this year. He's not involved as much as we want him to be or we expect him to be the first couple weeks of the season. So maybe it's a little bit more James Robinson usage. Maybe they're using the 3 wide receivers. He's not really running out of the wide receiver slot or anything like that, or that gadget role right away. They're kind of feeling it out and see how it goes. Maybe that's the time you bite on Travis Etienne. I think they both could have some impact for redraft for this season, though, especially in like PPR leagues. You could see that volume for Travis Etienne. And obviously he has that connection with Trevor Lawrence too, so that's going to help him out in the long run overall, especially, if DJ Chark leaves in free agency after the season too. So maybe then he moves more into that slot role if that's really how they choose to use him.
I like it. Some good points there, Craig. What about you, Jim? Your overall thoughts on Etienne, Robinson, and that backfield?
So your first question was, do I think this team can support 2 top 24 running backs? Absolutely not. I do not think they can. I just don't think the opportunity of volume is going to be there for them. I don't think they're going to be in positive game scripts enough for 2 running backs to have an effective role. But what I do think, though, is if you're going to grab one of them, I'd be grabbing James Robinson, because fact is, if they do let him go, he's shown the fact that he can take an NFL beating. And, teams like that. Teams are looking at guys that are, still big. They can still hammer. He took 100% of the team's 3-yard carries, short yardage carries. 100% of his team's short yardage carries. He was a monster in the 5-yard line and close, right? He knows how to get to the end zone. He's shown what he can do. And Travis Etienne, I'm sorry, man, there is concerns about his durability coming into the NFL and his ability to take on the impact and absorb an impact of a hit and shed it. And that is something James Robinson has definitely shown he can do. So out of the 2, I'm liking J-Rob. It might become maybe next year a muddy, and I'm not worried about Carlos Hyde. Seriously, you bring up Carlos Hyde on his 2-year contract. If anyone's getting cut, it's Carlos Hyde. But yeah, him and Urban will probably be gone blowing up shit. But if ETN can possibly form a role where they're kind of pulling Chenault out of, and Chenault's going more into the dominant wide receiver, and not kind of give him trick Cordell Patterson type plays, and they focus that more on Travis Etienne, they could have a potential very light version of a Nick Chubb Kareem Hunt in there, an AFC South version, very light. We'll see how it ends up happening, man. But and again, those 2 guys are good. But for this year, I don't think you're going to see 2 top 24 running backs.
I like it. I definitely like it. I know there's a lot of people who say, well, they're not that invested in James Robinson. Maybe they'll try and lean more heavily on ETN and give Robinson out. But that just doesn't make sense either. If they're so cheaply invested in him, why would you give away someone who just gave you that type of season that he gave you? It just doesn't make sense. But the ETN truthers will probably really want him out. So they're going to create the narrative of that. Lastly, we can't leave this division without talking about the King Henry himself, who feels like he's still being slept on. His current ADP is RB11. And can we please, I don't know if anyone, we'll talk about him, but can we please squash a Darrington Evans hype as well while we're talking about this? But does the loss of Arthur Smith potentially shift how the run game works? Henry, over the last 31 games, has had 22 RB2 finishes and 18 of those as an RB1. So over half of his last 2 seasons games have been RB1 finishes. 14 of those RB2 finishes produced over 21 points. Do we keep smashing King Henry at his ADP until proven otherwise? Or do we start to become concerned with the workload? And, as we talk about at the end of every season, well, Derrick Henry can't do that again. Can he, Jim?
I'm staying with him, man. You know what I mean? PPR rank last year, 337.1 points, 3rd overall. Number 1 in rushing yards, number 1 in attempts, number 2 in total touchdowns, number 3 PPR, like I said, number 5 in PPR in a game, points per game, and number 6 in fantasy points over expectation, which is actually huge too. So even though you're still doubting him, this dude was doing it. 73% of the time, he gave you at least an RB2 finish in the season. I've excluded week 17 with that boisterous Houston game that didn't help you anyway. Yeah, I'm absolutely buying him. I know some people might be a little bit down because of that championship game where he gave you less than 10 points against Green Bay, but he still buoyed you to get there against, let me double check who it was. I think it was Jacksonville. Yeah, Jacksonville and Detroit with 36.2 and 25.2 points respectively to get you into the championship game. So he is a guy that I'm definitely taking. We always talk about him every single week. It seems like he is this season's Irv Smith Jr. to me, where I seem to end up talking about him at least once every episode. People seem to be depreciating his value, saying the wheels are going to fall off with his multiple 300-yard touch seasons now and leading the league in rushing this year. But they don't ever bake that price in with Dalvin Cook, who has finally seen a full season, first time ever since high school. It's just blowing my mind. Heavy as the head that wears the crown, I guess, man. But I'm taking King Henry, and that RB11. That is absolutely fucking nuts.
What about you, Craig? And are you buying these Darrynton Evans rumors or apparently a potential uptick in usage?
So for Derrick Henry, I think you pretty much just keep playing him until he shows you he can't play anymore. Like especially in Dynasty, as long as you're competing, you want Derrick Henry on your roster until the wheels fall off completely. Like, you just wait till he rides off into the sunset. If you're not competing, you ride him out as long as you can. Try to get rid of him 1 year before you think it's off. It's going to be really hard to do with him just because we haven't seen anybody quite like him. Mm-hmm. And even when you talk about, his running back 2 finishes are better, the only games that he doesn't finish pretty much as a running back 2 is when they're trailing like big time and he's not on the field. Those are the only games. And we've seen it a couple times last year, but it's not anything I'm really concerned about because you'll take those losses when they come. Hopefully somebody else on your team is going to overperform and make up for it. But the weeks where that's not happening, you want Derrick Henry on your team pretty much every single week. Darrynton Evans, I really liked him coming out of college. I had a lot of dynasty shares because I'm like, well, maybe I'll get lucky and Derrick Henry won't resign. Then he resigned like right after that. So, but he's getting a lot of hype, especially just because of all the Twitter, being this nice guy, supporting content creators and everything like that. Biggest thing for him is he's got to be able to stay on the field. He dealt with a bunch of hamstring injuries last year, and if you can't get on the field, you can't get fantasy points either way. So it doesn't really matter if you're sitting on the bench. They brought in Brian Hill too. I know not everybody's crazy about Brian Hill, but he does have that experience. Maybe he takes that third down roll over. Jeremy McNichols was halfway decent at third down roll last year, surprisingly, after pretty much being ran out of the NFL. And he's on the pup right now, too. I'm trying to think of who else they have. They have Mekhi Sargent out of Iowa, who's a kid I really like, too. That was an undrafted free agent. Really does a little bit of everything well. Not the fastest guy in the world. Decent hands, decent pass blocking. If he gets into a role where he could succeed, I do like him, kind of as a sleeper guy, but probably not going to be anything for fantasy ever, though. Maybe a guy you stash on your taxi squad, see if he does anything, if he makes the team even.
Love it. So definitely some good points, some good information there. Gold or fool's gold, I'll kick it off. The gold, I'm going to stick with Derrick Henry, stick with the king. I mean, even if you're drafting right now, you cannot go wrong at his ADP. He's going he's going in the second round for you right now at this point, and he's almost a shoo-in for RB1 until the wheels fall off, like we said. So, I mean, you can't go against King Henry there. I'm probably going to go with I'm going with Travis Etienne. That RB13 price, if you got him in the rookie drafts, okay, that's not too bad. But if you're going for him now, RB13, that's a pretty high price to be paying for an offense that we know very little about. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know who's going to get the load of the work. And we don't know what type of role and impact that James Robinson's going to have on Travis Etienne's potential workload. I mean, you could produce 2 top 24 running backs, but if Etienne is the Kareem Hunt and James Hunt is the Nick Chubb, then you would expect their finishes to flip-flop and James Robinson be closer to the RB1 and then Travis Etienne be closer to, RB2 right around 22, 23, 24. Craig, what about you?
Well, I got Derrick Henry as the goal, that thing, especially in redraft too. It's just there's no doubt in him, kind of like we already talked about too much. But fool's gold, I kind of have the Jacksonville running backs. I think Travis Etienne could turn into something. We could see him be kind of like a souped-up version of Raheem Mostert in the NFL level. If he catches passes a little bit more than Mostert does, he could definitely be a value. And where he was going in rookie drafts, if you get him there, I think he's a value. Where you get him in startups, I'd probably be comfortable if you move him down about 4 spots or so. There's definitely room for him to be a top 10 running back in Dynasty, but there's a lot of question marks there too with Urban Meyer. James Robinson's kind of like fool's gold for me too. I think they're just going to run him into the ground because they have nothing invested in him too, that, they could be done with him after a couple of, after this year or next year, kind of like I already alluded to. And, he's a guy that I think he really is just good for fantasy last year just because he got that much volume. And if he's not getting that much volume, I don't see him really panning out in Dynasty.
I love it, Jim. Golden Fool's Gold.
I don't know if I can really sum up anything better than you guys just eloquently just said there. It's got to be the king. Like I said, heavy as the head that wears a crown. Can't really say anybody else is really trashy because you're not paying anything for the Texans running backs. And I'm pretty sure no one's going to be upset when Jonathan Taylor finishes as an RB1. So it's got to be one of the Jacksonville running backs. So take your pick. I like Robinson, though. That's not going to actually say his name as a trashy fool's gold. So just take your pick on one of them, man.
Yeah, I mean, the only other one, Nyheim Hines, has some risk. There could be some associated risk there because Jonathan Taylor, it may surprise a lot of people. He was one of, when you take all his stats into account, he was one of the best pass catching running backs. He had like a 90% catch rate. Like, he was really good catching the football. So Frank Reich chooses to go full on looking at Jonathan Taylor. His upside is just through the roof. You can go past the moon with him, but he's going to cost you the earth and the moon, and you might be heading towards Mars to get him. So that's the only issue I have if you didn't get him last year. We're going to move into the wide receivers. Before we move into the wide receivers, quick shout out to Viridian Global. I forgot to wear my Viridian Global gear today, but Craig wore a shirt and hat, and Jim wore a shirt. So there's plenty of Viridian Global gear to go around. Follow them at Viridian Global, VERIDIAN, on Twitter and ViridianGlobal.com. You can go and purchase any gear, your Scott Fishbowl gear, your Brighter Skies gear, your Sons of Dynasty gear, your True North Fantasy Football gear. It's all there. Hats, 3/4 length shirts, T-shirts. You can get any of it there. Let's move right into the wide receivers. Let's start with the Texans. So the game script is going to be ugly. The team is going to be bad and likely in line to be drafting their franchise quarterback next year. The ball is going to be a flying, and somebody has to catch that football, despite fantasy Twitter kind of leading you on to believe that, no one's going to catch football there. First question will be reaction to the Anthony Miller acquisition, which just happened a couple nights ago. Could the opportunity help him stand out? Secondly, Brandon Cooks has 1,100 plus yards in 4 of his last 6 seasons, over 100 targets in 5 of his last 6 seasons, and is currently going, I shit you not, I looked at this 3 or 4 times, he is going as a wide receiver 52 in Dynasty startups right this moment as we speak. He has finished as a top 20 wide receiver in 4 of his last 5 seasons. He's eclipsed 220 points in all 4 of these seasons. So what the fuck is the fantasy community doing that he is going that far despite his age, despite this falsified injury history that he has, because he's only missed like 4 games in the last 6 seasons. And if you want to elaborate on Nico Collins, Kiki Cutie, and we'll save Randall Cobb for the NFC side of things when he gets dealt here later today. So let's talk Brandon Cooks, Anthony Miller, and then anybody we might be sleeping on. Let's start with you, Craig.
Yeah, so I'll kind of talk about all the guys they do have in camp, the major factors at least, let's put it that way. They did just cut Dante Moncrief, so I was kind of cheering for that because we know he's got stone hands anyways. But I think they only brought him in for special teams, and they already brought in 3 other wide receivers for special teams. So I'll go through those 3 guys real quick. One's Chris Moore, who's in Baltimore. That's never really done anything there, was hurt half last season, so I expect him to get cut as well. Andre Roberts, kick return, that was most recently with Buffalo. I expect him to make the team as the kick returner. Alex Erickson, who played most recently with Bengals, pretty good punt returner. I expect him to make the team as well as the punt returner. So you got 2 wide receivers there, so they got room for about 4 more on the team. And Randall Cobb's most likely getting traded today. Hopefully you get like a 3rd-round pick for him. Probably ends up being like a 4th or something. Just depends on who ends up paying the salary, I would expect. If the Texans pay the salary, I expect a better pick. If Packers end up paying the salary, which I do not expect, I assume we get a worse pick. But I think getting rid of him is fine because they kind of overpaid for him anyways. And, you're trying to get a little bit more youth and give some of these other guys an opportunity. Brandon Cooks is the big one that you already talked about. He's being undervalued, whether it's in dynasty or redraft. I believe in redraft he's in the 40s as well. So, you're drafting him as a wide receiver 4 for a guy that is pretty consistent. We saw it even after Will Fuller was dealing with his suspension last year that he really stepped up his game there, except for the couple games that he was hurt as well. Tyrod Taylor has had some success making a wide receiver relevant, Sammy Watkins in Buffalo. So if there's just one main guy and he's getting a lot of targets, we definitely could see Brandon Cooks do very well again. Nico Collins is very interesting. I think this is a big year for him. If he gets in the field, if he plays a lot, if he shows that he can do something, it's going to be a major thing for him, especially in terms of dynasty. If he kind of doesn't do that right away and then all of a sudden the Texans trade Deshaun Watson away and they have all these draft picks and they invest heavily in a wide receiver, then that's kind of where Nico Collins' value gets knocked off. But I really think Nico Collins is a very interesting player. He's kind of a little raw still. He obviously didn't play last year due to the COVID opt-out. I kind of call him, DK Metcalf light, coming out of college. He's that bigger body wide receiver. He's got some speed. He can run the, your go route. He can win some jump balls and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. It just kind of depends what he can show this year. Anthony Miller, they obviously traded for. Really didn't give up much for him. It was a 5th-round pick for a 7th-round pick swap in there as well. He's a guy I really did like. Matt Nagy hated him for whatever reason. He loves Javon Weems for whatever reason. Javon Weems must have some kind of blackmail on Matt Nagy. But Miller has shown flashes in the past. He showed some flashes in his rookie year. He showed flashes at the end of his 2nd year with Trubisky where he was a relevant fantasy wide receiver. Could we see that again? Just kind of depends on how this offense shakes out. But I think, if they use some of that pre-snap motion, they kind of move him around the formation, definitely could be good for him as well. Then you get down to the last 2 guys competing for a roster spot. In my mind, Kiki QT, who was in Bill O'Brien's doghouse for the longest time, plus his injury history. So he had a lot of soft tissue injuries. He looked really well as a rookie, but he's had some fumbling issues as well. We saw it down at the 2-yard line against the Colts last year. Seen on a punt return as well, I believe, last year. So can he overcome some of that stuff? If you guys don't already know, when Wes Welker was on when he was on the Texans, he was actually the one that told them to draft Kiki QT. So if he gets cut, I think Wes Welker's still on the 49ers, so maybe he ends up on the 49ers. And then the last guy they have in the wide receiver room right now is Chris Conley, who we've already seen with Jacksonville Jaguars. Kind of that veteran presence. You kind of know what you're getting with him. More of an outside wide receiver, though.
I love it. And I mean, for in regards to the Javon Wims comment and having something against him, correct me if I'm wrong, but is he not the guy who threw a bunch of punches at a helmet of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson? So, that would probably scare me into keeping him on the roster as well. I'm just saying, I mean, if a guy's willing to chuck bombs at a helmet like that, he'd scare me a little bit too. We'll go over to you, Jim. Thoughts? I know you love Nico Collins, so I'm sure we're going to get a rant there, but thoughts on the Texans wide receivers and do you want any of them?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely want one. Brandon Cooks for sure. If I'm competing, he's a great wide receiver 3. Start 3 wide receiver teams. If it's going to be Tyrod, if it's going to be Davis, it doesn't matter really. They're going to look to a veteran, I believe, and feed him and funnel him. The other guy, like Coach Craig was saying, that I'm very interested in, and like you said, I'm probably going to go on a rant to, is Nico Collins. That guy got his draft capital, kicked the shit out of because of Shea Patterson. He's done it now to two wide receivers, 3 wide receivers. He's crushed their draft capital for. So I like him. It all depends on, like you said, if he can get on the field and show enough promise. I don't expect him to be a fantasy stud this year. I don't expect him to put up monster numbers for you. All I'm looking for, if you drafted Nico Collins in the back end of the 2nd and snipe me, BZ looking at you, is just progression. That's all I'm looking for Nico. Opportunity and progression. If he can make the right options when it's an option route, if he is good in his routes, if he has strong, solid hands, and just that's it, man. That's it. I don't care if he only sees the field a little bit of times starting off and very, very fake. I don't care if his quarterback overthrows him 6 or 7 times because I don't expect his quarterback to be fucking good. I just want to see what he can do on an NFL level against NFL talent because I am very interested to see him because you didn't really pay a lot for him in rookie drafts, like I said, back into the second. And he's a guy that, again, if you see a little bit of opportunity, he can rise his value. But Brandon Cooks is the one I'm really interested in. Like I said, wide receiver 3 on a team. If it's a 3 wide receiver start team, he's money. He is absolute money for you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. No, I completely agree. Moving over to Indianapolis, it's T.Y. Hilton and then a whole lot of potential upside pieces. Do you want Hilton on your team at his ADP of wide receiver 77, or do you think the decline may be real with Hilton? And then take a look at the other pieces there. Paris Campbell's had freakish luck with injuries. None of his injuries actually are linked at all. They're all completely different. They're completely opposite sides of the body. But he does have a ridiculous athletic profile at an ADP of wide receiver 65. Would you be willing to take that risk? And then, of course, there's Michael Pittman, who has the higher of the ADPs and is garnering hype this offseason to break out and be the Colts wide receiver 1. He did miss 3 games after a calf surgery that typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to return from. But something to think about that I actually found out and witnessed quite a bit as an Eagles fan is Carson Wentz has never in 5 years starting in the NFL had a 1,000-yard wide receiver. Could this actually be a trap wide receiver room as well? We'll start with you, Jim.
I don't think it's a trap wide receiver room. The guy I'm really interested in is Michael Pittman. I'm a big fan of his coming out of USC. He has the NFL pedigree with his dad, Super Bowl champion, Michael Pittman Sr. And if I miss out on him, the guy I would be willing to grab is the 9-game wonder boy, Paris Campbell. He has the highest upside. I'm not 100% sold on T.Y. Hilton just because of the age factor in Dynasty. He's not a wide receiver I'm really looking to grab. It would have been Paris because he has an opportunity to, again, Coach Talk saying he's going to be a big focal point of the offense. We'll see it when we get it because what I said, 9 games and over 32, right? 32 games possible, and he's only played 9, so – but he's young too. He's only 25, 26. He's young. So we could see. But Michael Pittman. I'm a big fan ever since he came out of USC.
And what about you, Craig?
Yeah. So I think you can definitely take that shot on Hilton if you really want to, a wide receiver 77, in startups, just because you're paying nothing for him. And at that point, those are some guys that I'll target aging wide receivers there in startups, like him, Emmanuel Sanders. They're pretty much free. So if they come on, they do anything at all, and you can flip them for a 2nd-round pick. You just get they had the big 2 weeks in a row, and you flip them for a 2nd-round pick. That's just free at that point because you're turning a 16th, 17th round pick in your startup for a 2nd-round pick in your rookie draft. So anytime I can do that, I try to do that. But Hilton, until last year, when he had a couple games against the Texans and the Raiders. Outside of that, since Andrew Luck retired, he did not have 100 yards receiving in a single game until those games. So over a year and a half. So there's concerns there. Maybe Carson Wentz helps him out with the deep ball. If Carson Wentz can, kind of get that deep ball back. Kind of already talked about that too, where he was holding on the ball for too long. Hopefully he has some of these guys underneath that makes him feel more comfortable. And then they can kind of pick and choose their shots. But maybe T.Y. Hilton could end up being a little bit of that decoy even this year. We'll see if he stays healthy too, because he's had a lot of those soft tissue injuries. Michael Pittman Jr. is a guy that I love quite a bit as well. I thought he could have been a end of the first round type of guy in the real NFL draft. He ended up going, just in the beginning of the 2nd round. A big guy. He's a pretty good route runner. He's a lot quicker than you actually think he is, given his size. Probably give credit to his dad for that, since he was an NFL running back, but you saw him run that little dig route against the Green Bay Packers where they were just playing zone. He catches the ball like 6 yards and just takes off for like another 70 because they can't catch up to him because the one corner blitz and there's nobody behind him. So I think he's definitely interesting. I kind of want him in all formats, whether it's dynasty or even redraft this year, because I think his redraft price is actually pretty nice. Somebody in theory should have to break out from this wide receiver core. But we'll get into that a little bit later when I talk to the tight ends, because I went back and looked at some of the Carson Wentz, some of the Frank Wright trends and stuff like that too. But Paris Campbell, not really somebody that I'm interested in. I kind of played that game before. It just doesn't really pan out too well. He's had the injuries. He's got that athletic profile. But I think, honestly, Zach Pascal is the number 3 wide receiver on this team already, because he's been on the field. They trust him. They put that second-round tender on him. He's going to be on the field. They trust him. And until Paris Campbell can pass him up again, I think he's the wide receiver 3. So Paris Campbell could pass him up. He could pass up T.Y. Hilton. We'll just see what ends up happening with it. But I think until further notice, Pascal is going to be out on that field, and he actually led the wide receivers in snap percentage a good majority of the year last year too as well. And then even like what you said with Michael Pittman Jr., it was amazing how fast he came back from that injury, because it was a leg compartment syndrome injury. He actually went to the hospital for it. And he came back in 3 weeks, and it should have been like 6 weeks. So it's just crazy. So hopefully he doesn't have anything else crazy like that happen in his career, but I definitely think he's the one to have in this room. But Zach Pascal, just going back to him real quick, if I'm in best ball draft, you're like down there around 20, just pick Zach Pascal, because there's going to be 2 to 3 weeks out of the year that he's going to plug into your lineup where he just has like their random 2-touchdown game. So that's a guy that I'm interested real late in best ball drafts, especially for this year, though.
Yeah, I really like Zach Pascal too, for the fact that he's a red zone monster. He's proven extremely reliable in that red zone, and he proved extremely reliable with with Phillip Rivers. So, I mean, that speaks volumes for sure. Next up, Jacksonville, Chenault and Chark seem the pieces being debated in the Jags receiving room, while Marvin Jones is just kind of hanging out there, sneaking around. Chenault is intriguing for his yak ability, and Chark had his wide receiver 18 breakout just 2 years ago prior to terribly inconsistent play last season, along with his injuries. Jones has a crazy nose for the end zone with exactly 9 touchdowns in 3 of the last 4 seasons. And I actually broke down the math on the season that he got injured. He was on pace for exactly 9 touchdowns again. Despite T-Law's quote-unquote generational talent in startups, the first wide receiver off the board for Jacksonville, they're actually going back-to-back, is DJ Chark at 33 and Laviska Shenault at 34. Which of these guys do you want? And if T-Law is so generational, then why are these pass catchers going where they're going, and the running backs going as a fringe running back 1 and a running back 2? We'll start with you, Craig.
I think there's just a lot of questions in this offense. That's kind of why you see them going where they're going. For a redraft focus myself, I am trying to get Marvin Jones everywhere I can, because you're getting him like round 11, around 12, which is just ridiculous with the consistency that he's shown. I think he's a wide receiver that fits Trevor Lawrence very nicely. It's kind of what he's seen in college with like a T. Higgins, a Justin Ross, even Amari Rodgers, even though he's 5'9", he's a guy that could go up and get the ball, win contested catches and stuff like that. So I think that's really going to help him. And I think that's going to hurt DJ Chark, at least for this season. I'm really interested to see whether DJ Chark moves on to a different team next year, and how is that going to impact him? Because I think he's just a wide receiver 2 on another team. And, you talked about his wide receiver 18 season. Even in that season, he was very inconsistent. So he had some big boom weeks. He had some weeks that were not quite as nice either. So he's kind of a touchdown or bust guy too. He does have that really good athletic profile, but if he's not scoring the touchdowns, if he's not getting those long passes, he's kind of limited. And I think Marvin Jones kind of eats away from that, at least this year. Laviska Shenault, I know the hype has kind of gotten off the tracks a little bit for a while. Seems like it kind of came back down to earth a little bit now, though. But the thing that really intrigued me is last year, they didn't really use him very creatively. He got a couple touches in the backfield. I thought they should have been doing a little bit more of that. Now you bring in a Travis Etienne that you're trying to use in that role. where he's kind of the slot. He's kind of the guy that you're moving around and stuff like that. They brought in Jamal Agnew, who we kind of talked about when we did the free agency thing. And he's not just going to be a kick returner for the money that they gave him. They gave him $5 million, up to $7 million a year for a freaking kick returner. So he's going to have some of those creative plays where he comes in, and that's those touches. They could be valuable touches for Laviska Shenault. And I have some questions about him, whether it's that because he's not quite that, real wide receiver yet at this point in his career. He does have some injury concerns going back to college even. So you could be, to me, he's kind of like a guy that could be either we could look at him next year and he's like a solid wide receiver too, or we could look at him how we're kind of looking at Deebo Samuel now, where he's been injured quite a bit and we have a lot more question marks, and maybe one of his teammates is even becoming more valuable than him.
Love it. Good example there. What about you, Jim?
Man, that was a great example there with Debo. Visk is the one I actually want. He was the second piece of this offense I wanted. The first one was J-Rob, I was alluding to way back when we talked about Trevor Lawrence being overvalued. Like Coach Craig said, he is slowly coming into his own right as a wide receiver. He's a gadget guy in Colorado where they manufacture touches for him there. And rightfully so, I could see why Jacksonville tried to do that, right? It was more try to do what the player is good at instead of trying to assimilate him to your offense. I get that. But now you have Travis Etienne for that role. You can move him out. I'm really concerned, though, if he doesn't do well enough, they will sign DJ Chark, and you're going to be left holding the bag. I don't think his value – because like the other reason I'm grabbing him is because I am predicating it on DJ Chark leaving in free agency where his price is going to be too high. And then that value of Visca is naturally going to rise from what you're paying for him right now. And those are investments that I'm always looking to make in Dynasty because, again, like you can get them cheaper and then you can flip them for what is perceived as a lower-end wide receiver that was once at this point and maybe even ahead of him at this point, which is hilarious, and lower-end tight end or running back. But what I really want to ask you guys is Craig was touching on it. The guy who wants in season long is Marvin Jones. Do we see Marvin Jones become score 4 touchdowns in a game for his third NFL team? Like, it's crazy. He's done it for Cincy. He's done it for Detroit, man. 4 touchdown games by 2 different teams. Do you think you actually see it? Because, like, again, Trevor Lawrence, rookie quarterback, probably going to be relying on a veteran presence, and the dude has a fucking nose for the end zone. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. That would be so cool to see that because I don't think you're ever going to see that again in the NFL if that ever happens. If I was Trevor
He's a Hall
Lawrence,
of Famer then.
If I was Trevor Lawrence, I'd be looking to make that happen no matter what. Our final stop in the wide receiving room is the Titans. They made the big move to bring in Julio Jones, and they've added a far more reliable number 3 in Josh Reynolds. A.J. Brown is back after being the wide receiver 11 last year, and he actually missed 2 games. He has back-to-back 200-plus PPR seasons to his name. In nearly half of his games, he's been the wide receiver 2 or better. That's 14 of his 30 games in the NFL so far. The Titans ranked 24th in receptions at the wide receiver position last season, 27th in targets to wide receivers. Jones should definitely improve the receptions if targeted enough. But is there enough work to sustain 2 reliable wide receivers in fantasy? We kind of touched on the concerns a bit earlier with Tannehill. Can Jones hold up, and is he a value if you're contending? And has A.J. Brown's value, has he done enough to warrant his current startup ADP value of wide receiver 2? He's going behind Justin Jefferson right now as the wide receiver 1. We'll start with you, Jim.
Just real quick, can you repeat that? He's going as wide receiver what in Dynasty Startups?
2.
Dynasty Startups, he's going as 2. Like Stephon Diggs retired, Tyreek Hill, these guys are gone, right? He went 2.
This is per FFPC, RotoViz, Dynasty Startup, cool. Super Flex.
And here I was thinking he took a little bit of a hit because of Julio coming in, and I was trying to actually grab him because the dude, for like a guy that had like 200 yard or 200 PPR seasons back to back, I don't ever see like him get the respect. Like I have him on some teams, and I try to like throw some trade offers with him, like seeing what can happen as packages, and like, man, I apparently overvalue him way more than everybody else in the industry because, like, I see him as a stud. I see him, like, on the equal path with DK Metcalf. actually a little bit ahead of DK Metcalf. I do think if you're a contender, Julio's a good buy because, like I said, you probably got him, picked him up cheaper when there was a decline and he was still in Atlanta before the news broke that he was getting traded to Tennessee. He could definitely help you out. I don't see him being a top end tight end for you, wide receiver for you, like your wide receiver 1 on your team. I wouldn't want him, but like your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, that's fucking money. That, like I said, apparently I'm lost with AJ Brown though, because I thought he was actually taking a dip with that Julio news because I can't seem to trade him for a premium value.
I mean, there's a potential that in other places he might be going lower, but judging by the sounds of that, I'd say he's probably at least being drafted as a top 5 wide receiver. And call me crazy, but I don't value him the same at all. Craig, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think there's enough volume in this offense, and it's going to be concentrated for both these guys to be relevant, for A.J. Brown to be a wide receiver 1 this year, and for Julio Jones to be, like a top 15, top 18 wide receiver in redraft. So if Julio stays healthy, that's the big if kind of there. I think, all the other pieces, they're going to get a couple targets here and there, but it's not like Derrick Henry's eating up a bunch of targets out of the backfield. He gets maybe 2 a game if he's lucky. And then, you have the whole tight end situation that we'll talk about a little bit later. But, Josh Reynolds, how often are they going to go 3 wide receiver sets? I do like Josh Reynolds if something does happen to Julio. So if you're in Dynasty, maybe you kind of stash him. Maybe Julio doesn't stay on after the season and Josh Reynolds is there and he does enough this year that they don't really go out and spend big on another wide receiver. Maybe they spend money elsewhere because their defense still isn't the best. They're still trying to work on that as well. So there's a lot of question marks there. But I think A.J. Brown, wide receiver 2 might be a little bit of reach. Before Julio was there, he was my wide receiver 1 in Dynasty, but he's definitely up there with some of these other guys. Tyreek Hill's definitely got to be up there as well. I think a lot of people are just, so many people in Dynasty are going towards that youth movement. They want to – I can't put Justin Jefferson ahead of A.J. Brown because Justin Jefferson's only done it 1 year. A.J. Brown's done it back-to-back years. And A.J. Brown did it last year on 2 bum knees. And, the one game that he missed early in the season, he had a bone bruise in his knee. Those things don't heal for a month. I had a deep bone bruise in my foot when I first started playing college, or when I started my freshman year of high school football, and that thing took 6 weeks to heal. So in your knee, it takes probably 4 weeks, and he just kind of rested for 1 week and then went out and played on it. And people just don't consider that. I think he had surgery on both his knees in the off season as well, but I think the talent with him is just so special, and people that put DK Metcalf ahead of him in Dynasty, that's just kind of another story because he was better than him at Ole Miss. He's better than him in the NFL. So, and you could argue he has a worse quarterback in Ryan Tannehill than Russell Wilson as well. So I just think the upside is very high with A.J. Brown, especially if they, if something ever did happen to Derrick Henry and they have to throw the ball more often too. Because, if you get Brian Hill, a Darrington Evans, one of those guys that we talked about before, they're not going to run the ball 25 times a game with one of those guys. They're going to throw to Julio and they're going to throw to A.J. Brown. They're going to flip the script because Ryan Tannehill is a decent enough quarterback to do that.
I love it. That
Absolutely.
is perfect. Spot on. Jim, gold, fool's gold.
So I've been going back and forth on who I think I should put as my gold. Either one is a Titan. I'm going A.J. Brown, man. The guy is just consistent. I think, I thought he was getting a dip, like I said earlier with that Julio news, but apparently he's not. People think he's fire like me, so it's awesome. My fool's gold is I don't really know because again these guys are so fucking cheap. Like you said earlier, Brandon Cooks wide receiver 56, Colts receivers who knows 66 and beyond I think is what you were saying besides Pittman. I don't know who you could really say is trash there, man. Maybe DJ Chark because he's the highest one of them all, but even still, what's that wide receiver 33? I'm pretty sure he's going to return ADP on that. Pretty, I don't know, pretty rough, man. I don't really have a fool's gold for that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my fool's gold was gonna be I mean, I'm spotty on AJ Brown at wide receiver 2 and living up to those lofty expectations of being wide receiver 2 when you got DeAndre Hopkins and his target share, you got Tyreek Hill and his target share, you got Stephon Diggs and his target share, and all the work that these guys get. It's just so hard to live up to those expectations. That's the only reason I did kind of debate it. But I mean, he's a stud. He's an animal. And you talked about the youth movement, also the yak movement. People love yards after catch. If you can create after the catch, people are drafting that all day, every day, 10 times a Sunday. So for me, I actually agree with you, Jim. I'm not going to name a fool's gold because there's just such tremendous value in this division. And there's so much turmoil and so much turnover happening that these guys could crush it, or these guys can just plant completely and be off the radar by the end of this season. So it's so difficult to call it because of the situation and the influx of it that's happening with the AFC South. What about you, Craig?
My goal's still going to be AJ Brown. And the one thing I didn't mention before is, you have him and Julio on the same team. So I can't wait till they just put Julio out wide and then they put AJ Brown in the slot, like right next to each other. And it's just like, good luck. So it's just going to be fun to watch. And then you got Derrick Henry like in the backfield. It's like, okay, are they going to run the ball or are they going to throw it like this side? Because you just know one of those things is going to happen.
And you got Reynolds out on the other outside. Like, I mean, let's not disrespect. Like, it's pretty hard to follow up AJ Brown and Julio Jones, but he's not bad. He's a really good third option. Look at what he did in LA with the Rams. He's a really good third option.
Yeah, he definitely had his moments for sure, especially later on last year too. But I think my fool's goal is probably going to end up being DJ Chark, just because like all these people have these lofty expectations because Trevor Lawrence is coming in. He had that wide receiver 18 season 2 years ago, but like I mentioned earlier, he wasn't even like that reliable in that year. You had the really good weeks and you had the really bad weeks. So it's just kind of up and down. And we've seen wide receivers like that come and go in the NFL level. If he doesn't latch on with Jacksonville, what if he ends up in a worse situation where he's a wide receiver 2? Or maybe he ends up in a situation where he's even a wide receiver 3 and he just isn't that highly involved in the offense. There's just a lot of variables there too. And you think if Jacksonville really wanted to keep him, they probably would have tried to lock him up by now too, especially with the money that they had.
Absolutely. No, I love it. We're going to move into the tight ends. I just saw some breaking news that Xavier Howard officially requested a trade. That's pretty wild. Out of Miami, that's pretty brutal. That would be a back-breaking move for their secondary to lose Howard, but just thought that would be cool to bring up and break here. Tight ends, we'll try and keep it brief because there's really only 2 tight end rooms we're talking about here. The Texans, I know there are players who have to catch the ball. I did mention that with the whole in respect to the wide receiver position, but do any tight ends intrigue you at all? They ranked 24th in targets last season with Deshaun Watson throwing the ball. I made sure that was in brackets. They were 18th in fantasy points per game, but that's only because I think it was it Atkins who has these ape-like arms that just snag down like ridiculous amounts of touchdowns. But they with the 18th in fantasy points per game at the position, 8 weeks producing 10 or less points from their tight end 1. Craig, I'll let you go with this. I'm sure you have some sort of comment to make about a tight end there, but what do you think?
Okay, so for that too, it was Darren Fells who scored all the touchdowns. He's just that big, 6'7", 275-pound former basketball player. Slow as crap, but he always got open somehow. It's just like they forgot he wasn't a lineman or something. It was just weird. Like he'd always get open down the middle of the field. They're like, how? Because like you watch him and you're like, he probably ran like a 5 flat. I don't know what he actually ran. I don't even know if he ever ran the 40 because he played international basketball before he played in the NFL. But I don't even know where the heck he ended up. But he was the touchdown monster that they relied on. He'd be that guy to get random 2 touchdown weeks. Or, he'd get 1 catch for 1 yard. So he's gone, though. Jordan Akins is there. Obviously, people wanted to, hype him up for the longest time. He's just not good at football. He can't block. He drops a bunch of passes, most notably that Bears game where, he blamed the sun that he didn't see the ball. But he's a guy you'd never want in your lineup because every time you start him, he doesn't do anything. You'll get the random, 7-catch week the week before, and then you just feel stupid that you started him. I think Brevin Jordan, who came in out of Miami, is pretty much the same player. So at that point, it's like, why are you keeping Jordan Akins around? Because you just got a guy who's just as good and probably better at catching the ball at least. And neither one of them is particularly good at blocking. Probably the one tight end that's probably their best overall tight end right now is Pharaoh Brown. He's more like a move tight end fullback, but he's their best blocking tight end. He's shown some flashes last year. He was starting to play the biggest amount of snap shares for the Texans last year until he got a concussion. Then he missed a week. Then he kind of came back, was a little bit limited, and then he kind of took over again there. They also brought in Izzo from the Patriots, who's primarily known as a blocker as well. Played a bunch of snaps for them, didn't have many targets at all. And then last but not least, they got I can't remember how to say his first name, Khalil Warren out of like San Diego State that they drafted a couple of years ago. Always been hurt, can't block, can't catch the ball. Same thing as Jordan Akins. So you're looking at some guys that can block and maybe Brevin Jordan. So if you're looking at Dynasty, Brevin Jordan's probably the one that you want. Pharaoh Brown's kind of that sleeper name, though, because he can block, he can catch, he can kind of do a little bit of everything. Coming out of Oregon, he was a decent prospect at one point in time, but he went undrafted, kind of fell off the radar for a couple of years. But since he's been with the Texans, he's been a solid little player.
Leave it to Coach Craig to make one of the most unsexy tight end rooms actually sound interesting. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to this room before we move on?
No.
Thank you. We'll move on to the Colts. The Colts are only intriguing for the fact that Carson Wentz loves his tight ends. The last 3 seasons, the Eagles saw Eagles tight ends ranked in the top 3 in targets, including 2 times as the most targeted group of tight ends. Colts tight ends ranked top 10 in fantasy production last season, although their number 1 tight end in 6 of the weeks, Trey Burton, is gone. The Colts tight ends are suddenly kind of intriguing with the arrival of Carson Wentz. Give me a one name that you would buy out of here, because I think all of them are going outside the top 20, even maybe top 25. We'll start with you, Jim.
Scott Fishbowl, I double tagged him with the guy I forgot to mention earlier, Jack Doyle and Kylan Granson. It's just a muddied. He was my last pick in the Scott Fishbowl. It's a really muddled tight end room. You alluded to Carson Wentz seemingly liking the tight ends. Again, he's never had wide receivers as talented as this on paper, so I don't know if the tight end was just a factor of that, because, he had great tight ends in Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. So we're going to see if he liked the tight end or if he liked the talent. You know what I mean? And it's just open. I like, for the touchdown side, man, like, I don't want a soundbite of this, but like Mo Cox, baby, like this guy is in. He's big, he's bad, he's a end zone monster when it comes to a target. I could definitely see Wentz latching on to him, because I don't really see, if they're throwing the ball, anybody that could really be their end zone target. That's a really big guy that you want to throw like a fade route to, or just come across the middle, even like maybe get creative and do one of those like shovel passes like Pat Mahomes does to Travis Kelce there, right? When he makes him in motion. We're gonna see, man, because like I was always the guy that said like Carson Wentz likes the tight ends because the tight ends were the only viable option there to really be catching passes, because I didn't really like Alshon Jeffrey. But like I said, I'm huge on Michael Pittman, so I'm gonna see if it's the talent or if it was the position. And if Frank Reich has tendencies too, right? So we're going to see.
Love it, Jim. Craig, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think for Dynasty, Kylan Granson's the one that you end up on. He was a converted wide receiver, which is important to note too. So his blocking's not quite up to par yet. He's still kind of like around that lighter side on the tight end, maybe weighing in at 240 pounds. But he was that wide receiver at Rice. Then he transferred to SMU, kind of played that slot tight end a little bit in line, but not too much. Going back to Carson Wentz, I really dug into it. So when him and Frank Wright were together in 2016, 2017, threw to the tight end 31% in 2016. 2017 was about 30%. And then I also put down the running backs too. So in the 2016, it was about 18% of the running backs. It was 13% in 2017 that year that they did go to the Super Bowl, but Darren Sproles was hurt a bunch of that year too, who was kind of the main pass catching back. And then Jay Ajayi came in and he didn't really catch passes either. So let's see. Then I went down to Carson Wentz since Frank Wright left and with the Colts. In 2018, he threw to the tight end position about 34% of the time and the running back position about 17% of the time. 2019 was the real big spike one. He threw to the tight end position 36.5% of the time, but that's the year all their wide receivers were also hurt as well. So you had that massive, the massive target share to Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. 2020 is about 28.4% to the tight end, but that's including Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts as well. And then 16% of the time to the running back position. Also going back to 2018, there was a couple of games of Nick Foles in there too, but it was literally the same pace as Carson Wentz that year too, where it was about 12 targets a game to the tight end position. So that was pretty good. In the years that Frank Wright has been with the Colts with Andrew Luck, 26% of the time it went to the tight end, about 20% of the time to the running back position. 2019 with Jacoby Brissett, tight end position was about 27% of the time and 18% of the time to the running back. The real one that was different was last year with Philip Rivers. It was only 22% of the time to the tight end position and 24% of the time to the running back position. But Philip Rivers has kind of been known as that dump off guy too. And I think that's a lot of where, we talked about the Jonathan Taylor, his catch percentage, his targets, a lot of them came in those little dump offs from Philip Rivers and designed screen passes. So I think his receiving work could actually go down, even though people are kind of trying to hype him up saying he's getting better in that aspect. Or at worst, it kind of stabilizes and his catch rate goes down because he's not getting all these 2-yard dump-off passes from Philip Rivers. Carson Wentz can move around a little bit, even if he kind of got a little bit scared about it last year. But, if you get some of those design play actions, some of those design rollouts, that's really going to help him. So I think overall, from all those numbers, the tight end position, probably about 29-30% of the targets are going to go there. But then when you spread it out amongst all these three guys, it doesn't really amount to much because you got Jack Doyle, you got Mo Alley Cox, and you got Kylan Granson. I think Granson really slots into that role that Trey Burton played last year, kind of, that move tight end, that slot tight end. He's a guy I'm really interested in if he ends up being kind of that slot more times than not. So maybe a Paris Campbell's hurt again, maybe a T.Y. Hilton's hurt again. There's definitely a potential there. But definitely for the future, he's the one I want. Just, he's the youngest guy. We kind of know what Mo Alley Cox is now. I know everybody on Twitter loves him, but, we're in year 5, and we're going into year 5, I believe it is, for him. He's had, 2 fantasy relevant games in 4 years? And one of them was when Jack Doyle was out, and he was great for DFS, but, at some point, you're just kind of chasing a dream that's never going to be there. And I think a lot of times with these former basketball players that are tight ends in the NFL, everybody wants them to be Jimmy Graham, Tony Gonzalez, and Antonio Gates. More often than not, they are not those guys. The Colts, they chased it for a while before Mo Alley Cox with a player named Eric Swoop, who played college basketball as well. Never turned him into anything. I think the most targets he had in a year was 12. So more often than not, these guys do not pan out. But, everybody's chasing their dream. And, kind of that rookie hype guy was that Samias Reyes with the Washington football team, former basketball player playing abroad, coming over now. And you saw what just happened, today they signed Logan Thomas for a 3-year deal. So he's going to be dust too.
Love it. Good quality information there. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm hoping we can make this short and sweet. All I had in my notes was, can it get any worse than the Texans conversation, which was actually a fairly sexy conversation. And then I put Tebow time with the praying hands. Does anybody want to add to this?
Oh, man. Okay, first, I just want to say real quick, does anybody hope that Trevor Lawrence throws a touchdown pass to Tebow just to see Buddy on Twitter have to put out 25 G's worth of fucking jerseys? That was nuts. Man, I don't think come on. Is he actually going to make the team, you think? I don't know what we're talking about here.
This is a team that just has completely avoided the tight end situation and discussion altogether, like it's almost not even a position. So, Craig, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Okay, so here's the thing. I think Tebow actually makes this team just because he's going to sell tickets. He's from Jacksonville area. He's this big-name player. You search Jacksonville Jaguars, and the first person to come up is Tim Tebow, not even Trevor Lawrence. If you just go search on Google, it's kind of funny. But for the tight end position, if he shows the ability to do anything pass catching wise in the tight end game, he has a chance just because literally all these other guys they have on their team are all blocking tight ends. James O'Shaughnessy, Tyler Davis, Chris Manhertz, who's another former basketball player who's oddly enough a good blocker but can't do anything in the receiving game. So, and then Urban Meyer's boy, Luke Farrell, who was at Ohio State, that's predominantly known as a blocker as well. They took him in the 5th round. He should have been undrafted free agent, but that's my little rant about that. None of these guys can do anything in the receiving game. They're all just blocking tight ends. Oh, and then they got Ben Elfson, too, who's just another blocking tight end. So if Tebow can do anything pass-catching-wise as a tight end, he could have some type of impact. Probably not for fantasy, probably not for dynasty. Hey, maybe you throw him in your lineup one week for DFS and you get lucky. Maybe that's that touchdown week. Maybe we all win a jersey. That's kind of the hope, the prayer, the dream. But at the end of the day, he's just there to help sell tickets. And, this team's probably, people are like, oh, they got Trevor Lawrence, so they're going to win like 7 games now. No, they're going to win like 4 games. They're going to lose one of the games to the Texans because somebody has to lose to the Texans. And the Jaguars, as much as we want to hype them up and say they're a lot better than they were last year, they were still a 1-win team last year. They're probably going to be a 4 or 5 win team this year. And these tight ends, they just all kind of suck. But, hey, there's Tebow, I guess.
Love it. Best way to wrap that up. Lastly, we're going to stop in Tennessee.
He wasn't kidding. It's Tebow. I looked up Jacksonville players. Tebow, number 1. Trevor Lawrence, number 2. Marvin Jones was the 3rd player. I was like, what is happening in Duval? That's fucking nuts.
Whoever has a name. You got to just have a name. That's all it takes. But, yeah, in Tennessee, they've had decent showings from tight ends over the last 5 years. We've seen Delaney Walker. We saw Jonnu Smith last season. Jonnu Smith and Delaney Walker together have kind of been okay. Could Anthony Firkser be next? I know that, the hype was getting real, and then Julio Jones arrived, and the hype literally screeched a halt. The Titans' tight ends were targeted 7th most in 2020. Although this pace seems unsustainable given the look of the tight end depth chart, is there something there for Firkser as a late value in such a volatile position where people are always looking for the next Logan Thomas or Robert Tonyan? His current ADP for Anthony Firkser is tight end 25. I would like to point out that they did target the tight end position like 130 times last season. Despite the losses, there's only, I think it was 7 teams that targeted the tight end less than 100 times. So let's be real. There's a decent amount of work still to go in the direction of Anthony Firkser, despite people all over Twitter being like, where's the Anthony Firkser truthers now? The tight end position gets targeted a lot more than people think. The only team that really made it ugly last season, actually there was 2 of them. It was the Panthers and it was the Patriots. But please look at that situation. Far worse than Anthony Firkser. Craig, we'll start with you if you have anything to add to that situation.
Yeah, so I'm not particularly high on Anthony Firkser. A lot of his work did come out of the slot last year. He played 40% of the time there. I have him projected for about 76 targets, 53 catches, a little over 500 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns. If he's going to produce for fantasy, he's going to have to make a mark in the red zone. Haven't really seen it out of him. He's had 1 touchdown all 3 years of his career so far. He did have 7 red zone targets last year, though, playing in that limited role, but we'll just see how that all shakes out. He kind of came on, after Taylor Lewan went down with an injury and Jonnu Smith was asked to block more. So are we going to have Jeff Swaim, one of these other tight ends kind of block more and then he's going to break out that way? Or, is it going to be one of those guys on the early downs blocking, then he's going to play that slot role, but then he's kind of competing, with Josh Reynolds for some of those targets or being on the field in that position even. So I do have a lot of concerns with him. I feel like, that range that you're buying him at now is not terrible. I think when it was getting really hyped up, it was kind of getting out of hand. I'm not sure exactly how high he got, but, it's closer to like tight end 18. And, I kind of compare him to Mike Gesicki, kind of a little bit Gesicki light, where he's just going to really have to depend on those touchdowns, play that slot role. And if he can do that, maybe he has some value, but I'm just not buying into it myself personally. The other tight ends they do have on the roster, Jeff Swaim kind of alluded to him already. He's more of a blocking tight end. We've seen him with the Cowboys. We've seen him with the Jaguars. We saw him last year even with the tight ends. He was kind of brought in midseason when they had all those COVID scares and all that stuff too. But that's pretty much the role he's going to do. They have a couple of guys that they brought in as free agents too. 2 of them are undrafted free agents. One's Burley Moore out of Kansas State. This is the guy I'm going to talk about a lot because, everybody wants to call Robert Tonyan Baby Kittle, but this guy is the real Baby Kittle. So we'll talk about him a little bit more later. And then Miller Forrestall out of Alabama, more of a blocking tight end as well. Showed a little bit of chops in the receiving game, a guy that I like better than, the guy we just talked about in Jacksonville with Luke Farrell. Maybe he makes the team, maybe he doesn't. Then the last guy they do have is Jared Pickney out of Vanderbilt. I believe he was with the Falcons a little bit last year. But he is the guy that is kind of famously, the Patriots interviewed him, and they said he was just like a loser or whatever. I don't know if you guys remember that at all.
I love that. That's a confidence boost if I've ever heard one.
This guy's a loser.
But that's what he was the most. That's like the most famous thing about him. He's okay in college, but nothing special there. But going back to Burley Moore, Kansas State, I call him Baby Kittle. Had a similar career path in college to George Kittle. Not like the most productive, pretty good after the catch, decent blocker. He started out his career at the University of Northern Iowa. Kind of a special place in my heart. Obviously, David Johnson played there as well. We've seen some decent NFL players come from there. I actually went to college about 20 minutes away from there, so I'm pretty familiar with it. I live right across from the campus for a little bit too in my life. But, you look at some of the measurables. He ran supposedly in the low 4.6s at one point. Draft Scout had him at 4.66. George Kittle, was in the 4.5s. The vertical jump was about the same. Broad jump, he was a little bit less than Kittle, but still pretty good for a tight end. Short shuttle, he was better than Kittle. 3-cone, he was a little bit worse. He put up 8 more reps on the bench press than George Kittle. And at the time of his pro day, he was 6'4", 240 pounds. George Kittle at the time of the combine, he's 6'4", 247. Moore played closer to 250 during the season at Kansas State, and he really came on this year, after that grad transfer over. But, he's a guy that's very interesting to me, a guy that has that blocking ability, has that run after the catch ability. If he gets a role in this offense, not saying it's going to be this year, but maybe down the line, especially with the way they haven't really invested in this tight end position, he could have a future there if he gets the chance. So he's the guy that I'm kind of looking at because he can do some of that stuff that Ferkser does, but he can also block at the same time.
I like it. Definitely some quality info there. Jim, anything to add?
So I was a little bit intrigued with Ferkser when he had a really high catch rate as a rookie, catching like almost everything, very limited role. Thought Delaney Walker would go out and they could maybe do some 2 tight end sets. And then a second year, didn't really do much. Again, very limited role. I think he only had like 20 or 30 targets. It wasn't too much. Last year comes out, shows he can do it. But again, like, where's the volume coming from this year? It was only because, like Coach said, Taylor Lewan went down, and it was a necessity because Jonnu Smith was there to end up blocking. That's a makeshift line if you ever have to ask a tight end to be covering for Taylor Lewan. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. So I don't actually see him having that much volume. 75 targets seems pretty high to me for him, but he does have a pretty good catch rate though. Like, he's always like 75% catch rate, I think is what he's usually showing. So he's what you're paying for him, it's nothing. You know what I mean? And like, everyone wants to reach that Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas did shit in the NFL up until last year. Like, shit. He did nothing. He was nothing. He got 4 teams or something like that before he ended up breaking out last year. Nothing against him. Congratulations, Logan. Get paid. That's awesome. But he's a 30-year-old tight end. So you do the math on when he came in, right? Former quarterback. He's cheap, and like we always say, after the top 3, you know who they are. You're just taking dart throws, so why not a dart throw on him? If you had him earlier on and you didn't cash out before Julio, I'm sorry, because you could have made out like a bandit. And if you bought him before Julio came in, you got to hold him. You can't you're not going to get the return on him.
Definitely, no, completely agree. So we'll quickly run the table on gold and fool's gold. Gold for me, I'm going to go with Anthony Ferkser. I think he's got the best opportunity for a workload. And, as one of the only people there in the tight end room that's going to get a workload, at least for this year and for the foreseeable future, unless Craig Sleeper pops out here at some point. The fool's gold for me, oh, man. I don't even know. It's such a mess of tight ends who are probably just going to either land right around their ADP or just completely flop up. My fool's gold's Tim Tebow. call it whatever. Go get your 25K or your shirts or whatever you want to get, but get that touchdown. But that's about all I see happening. Craig, gold.
Yeah, so I think that Tebow one's just good because it's just funny that he's even getting drafted in like some leagues, and I think even Scott Fishbowl he got drafted in a couple leagues too. I'll say one thing real quick too about Ferkser. You talked about the high catch rate last year among tight ends. He had the highest catchable target rate at 90.6%, which is just like unrealistic. Like that's bound to go down. So I forgot to mention that when I was even talking, but that's just like ridiculous. So he had like a lot of that short slot work too, so that definitely helped him out. Maybe his yards per catch go up a little bit more this year, but maybe that target and that catch rate goes down. Who knows? That's just something to watch out for as well. But for gold for me, I'll put it, kind of three guys. Kylan Granson for the Colts, and this is all obviously for Dynasty. Brevin Jordan for the Texans if he does get a role. And then my sleeper, Baby Kittle, Brilly Moore for the Tennessee Titans. And then Fool's Gold, I think, is just Ferkser because he's really the only one getting drafted worth the crap. I'll throw Jordan Akins in that mix too because like you should not waste a pick on Jordan Akins. 3 touchdowns in like 3 years, like 400 yards last year, but like he's just like he shouldn't even make the team. Like there's no
Some
reason.
of us are still holding hope, Coach. Some of us are still holding hope.
Yeah. Actually, as funny as it is in this episode, we talked about the 2 players in the NFL currently that both played in the Under Armour baseball game and the Under Armour football game. And that's Jordan Akins and A.J. Brown.
Love it. Great, good info. You just never know when that might come up as a question. Jim, what about you for Golden Fool's Gold?
Season long gold, it's Jack Doyle. Dynasty, like Coach said, it's Kylan Granson. He's cheap. This guy I'm really intrigued in, like the opportunities there for him to take over that tight end room, not this year, but maybe next year. And we all know when the tight ends, unless you're Kyle Pitts, that there's some sort of learning curve there that is good to be expected. For my Fool's Gold, it's got to be, and I'm sorry, Connor, it seems like me and Coach are just on the same level. It's Ferkser, man, because he just costs too much. And again, after the top 3, you might as well wait. You know what I mean? Like just wait until like your last pick. Grab your Kylan Gransons, grab your Jack Doyles, just like try to make it fit. Grab your Pat Freiermuth out of Pittsburgh. Apparently, he might have a large role. Different episode that was from last week. Didn't get to get in there with that one, but yeah, Pat Freiermuth. Yeah, that's about it for me.
Love it, Jim. Love it. This has been awesome, guys. For all of you who stuck around for the hour and 40 minutes, we love you. And if not, if you had to take it as a 2-parter, we still love you too. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching and supporting us. Make sure you rate, review, like, or subscribe wherever you listen to or watch. Wherever you listen to podcasts or watch the streams. Make sure you follow Jim at Gold Jacket QBs on Twitter. Follow me at Connor10 on Twitter, TEN. And make sure to give Craig a follow at Coach Craig Sport. And hit subscribe on his YouTube channel at Coach Craig Sports. And otherwise, make sure you check out the True North Fantasy Football Crew. Lots coming. 5 nights of content in season. So that is going to be awesome. And they're all starting to ramp up their work on Twitter at True North FFB, on Instagram, True North FFB, YouTube, TNFF Network, and on the old internet at TrueNorthFFB.com. And until next week, this has been a blast, guys. Next week, we're going to be talking AFC West. So we will see you next